It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Let's say hello to foreign editor Christopher Dickey.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks as well to Vivian Walt of Time Magazine.
Hello.
Mark Dean of the Bloomberg News Agency.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Nice to see as well Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rabo.
Good evening.
Hello to you. The World This Week, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter the hashtag F24Debate, or in this case, World This Week. This time, it's Charlotte, North Carolina, another U.S. city, first bearing witness to the police shooting death of an African-American, followed by protests, 3 nights running, 1 killed, the mayor imposing a curfew, the governor a state of emergency. The family demands the release of the video of the shooting of 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott. Police, so far, they've shown it to the family, but they're resisting making it public.
I never said full transparency. I said transparency, and transparency is in the eye of the beholder. I can tell you the party right now who really is my priority in honoring their request is the people who really are the victims of the shooting. So what I'm going to do is honor that request, and I'm going to tell you, if you think I say we should display a victim's worst day for public consumption, that is not the transparency I'm speaking of, sir.
Vivian Walt, does he have a point?
In some ways, I mean, this has been a very violent year in the U.S. It almost seems like we've kind of lost track of all these different incidents that have happened just during the course of 2016. And I think what's so striking about it is that it's also overlaid with this election that is also completely dominated by issues of race and racism. So I think that, in that context, yeah, sure, certainly.
All right, let's take a look now. One viewer saying, hearing about the events that have taken place in Charlotte is shocking. Still can't believe we have to protest for racial justice in 2016. Christopher Dickey, should that video be made public?
Yeah, absolutely it should. It may inflame opinion because it may really inflame opinion. In fact, the same police chief that was talking just now on the clip you ran, in another clip, said, I've looked at this and you can't really see him pointing a gun or anything like that. So it sounds like you would look at it and sort of conclude whatever you wanted to conclude, which is exactly what people are doing without looking at it. But they should at least release it. It's silly to hold it back. They will have to release it at some point, and they should get it over with.
In contrast to what we've seen in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where police were quick to release video footage, and now we have an indictment of a female police officer.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that you see it's a lot more peaceful in Tulsa than it is in Charlotte, but Charlotte probably also has bigger problems at this moment and before going into this.
All right, the statistics are sobering. The Guardian counts the number of people shot dead by police in the United States. We're up to 791 for this year alone. These are statistics from last year, from 2015, and it shows how non-white Americans make up less than 38% of the U.S. population, yet almost half of those killed are minorities, and minorities make up more unarmed people killed by police as well, more unarmed people killed as well. Mark Dean, what is the way forward? Because we're hearing sort of, as Vivian would say, it's these statements from the president so far a little bit underwhelming. There isn't this breakthrough that we were expecting.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there is a certain fatigue on the issue, and that's part of the problem. But I also really think that, this is also a gun laws question, and everybody knows that America, right to bear arms and so on and so forth. But when police officers think that someone's about to pull out a gun, I think that this helps lead to this sort of thing. Even when a gun isn't present. So I think it's a noxious mix of the two issues: the race problem and the gun laws.
Well, it's sort of instinctive profiling. The police go up and they see a very large black guy, and they think he's dangerous, even if he's a teddy bear, and even if the police are black themselves. In this case, in the case in Charlotte, the police officer who did the shooting was a black man himself, undercover. So I think, you know, there is this instinct to say that black people might have guns and might use them, and that's an extremely dangerous de facto profiling that exists in the United States.
Amar Abedrabo?
I don't know exactly the Charlotte case. I thought he has a book instead of a gun. So
That's one of the
That's what his
claims.
family was
okay.
saying.
So, but for me, I mean, seeing it from France, I'm always a bit shocked or a bit mal à l'aise, not at ease, with the fact that we can spend hours talking about the death of one person in the U.S. It's quite local news, actually. I mean, we are in France. The same day this gentleman was killed, there may be 100 or 200 people killed in Syria, in Aleppo. Do we give it as much importance? Do we debate? Unfortunately not. So if we're talking about racism, we do have also kind of our own point of view, ego, ethnocentric, or something like that. So
Back when it was 2 or 3 people being killed in Syria, unfortunately, then it made a lot more news than now. The problem is every day,
more and more
dozens,
I think
More and more
it's,
stories, but
it's
it
what
is.
Mark says, the fatigue. It's the same kind of fatigue. It's just after a certain time, the kind of proportions get so overwhelming that you kind of tune them out. And I think it's happened in both the U.S. with the police shootings, which has been a very present story actually for the past year, and of course Syria for 5 years.
All right,
Well, you know, tyrants depend on this, by the way.
Of course.
Yeah.
They depend on our fatigue, our inability to care anymore that hundreds of people die in a day in Syria.
That's why, as media, we should be more careful. Maybe.
And of course we will be talking before the show is out about the tragic situation in Syria. Christopher Dickey, of course, we all think back to 8 years ago. Barack Obama arrives in office. Some people talking about the start of a post-racial society, and this latest incident taking place in a city, Charlotte, North Carolina, which was sort of a model of the New South. It's got all these big corporate headquarters in it.
Well, it was a model of the New South until 2008. When the crash really hit Charlotte very heavily. And I was there just before that. In fact, I was there in the summer of 2008. Already there were some difficulties because what had happened was you used to have kind of a mixed city, and it did feel that way. But developers had come in as all the money had come in, and they had forced people out. They had forced a lot of black neighborhoods basically to shut down so that they could build these very speculative housing units. And then the crash came. They'd forced the people out. Nobody moved into the units. It was a mess. And Charlotte has remained kind of a mess ever since.
Here are some of, we were talking about it earlier, the candidates' reactions. Let's start first with Hillary Clinton.
There is still much we don't know about what happened in both incidents, but we do know that we have 2 more names to add to a list of African Americans killed by police officers in these encounters. It's unbearable, and it needs to become intolerable.
Is she striking the right tone, Vivian Waltz? Because we're hearing that she's not doing enough to energize African Americans to go to the polls.
I mean, I think she's not really doing enough to energize anybody of any ethnicity, but you know, that's Hillary. I mean, she is an extremely cerebral, extremely smart person. She is not a dynamic public speaker. I don't think she's ever been accused of being that. And she hasn't shown herself to be that through this, you know, do or die campaign. And so I think that, yes, it needs to become intolerable. She says all the right words, but she doesn't say it with the kind of fire in her belly that you would want to hear on an issue that's so sort of raw and so critical in the country at the moment.
Mark,
I think to be fair to Hillary, she's seeking to sound presidential here, and she does. You know, she's calm, rational, and you know, it's not really shouldn't be up to presidential candidates at this stage in the game to be sort of putting fire in people's bellies on an issue like this. But it, you know, that said, what Vivian was saying is exactly right. People are not passionate after Hillary Clinton speaks.
As for Donald Trump, well, he's also courting the black vote. We could show him earlier this week in Ohio, appearing alongside the likes of boxing promoter Don King. He's unequivocally denounced both killings in Charlotte and Tulsa, but also pushed for police to be able to stop and frisk suspects without probable cause, a policy that was struck down by the courts in New York because too often minorities were singled out. In Pittsburgh Thursday, he empathized with the law-abiding African-American residents, as he put it, who live in these communities where the crime is so rampant, while adding this.
And if you're not aware, drugs are a very, very big factor in what you're watching on television at night.
What?
He took some, probably, no?
Which drugs?
Did
what
he?
television? What is he talking about? I don't quite understand.
He's referring to the violence unfolding in Charlotte there.
Oh,
The demonstrations,
I
you mean?
see. That the demonstration. You mean everybody's stoned who's out there protesting against cops killing black people? I don't think that makes much sense. But look, the stop and frisk thing is going to be absolutely deadly for any outreach that he is making with the black public, with black voters. Stop and frisk was something that was a real hot button issue, and you can see why, because it was all about the perception of profiling. It may not have been about that. I mean, I wrote a book about the NYPD, and I talked to them a lot about stop and frisk, and they would call it stop, question, and frisk, and the questioning was vital. But the way the black community, a lot of people in the black community saw it was, cop comes up, sees you're a black kid, says, empty your pockets. You pull out a joint that's in your pocket that, you know, isn't going to hurt anybody, and they take you in on a misdemeanor drug charge. That was the kind of thing that was happening. Everybody in the black community knows that, just like everybody in the black community knows you're more likely to get shot. They don't need the statistics to tell them that. And Trump is playing to that. He is absolutely playing to that. He is playing the racist card again and again and again. And this new effort to look like he's moving to the center, that's for his white voters. That's not for the black voters.
Yeah.
He's not to convince the black voters. They know what he's about. But the white voters are going to say, well, now you see, he's sounding reasonable, isn't he?
I mean, I think it's, yeah, I agree with Chris. I think it's a mistake to kind of interpret what he says about, you know, we need stop and frisk policies in every city in America as being, you know, oh, there goes Trump again, sticking his foot in his mouth. I think it's actually quite calculated. I think that he knows he's not going to get black votes. That, you know, every poll tells him that, and he knows that himself. And but he can use these kind of messages. Supposedly, they're, you know, addressed to the black community. In fact, they're addressed to the white communities across the country who are worried and scared, and who he needs to come out and vote for him.
If he was talking about demonstrations and drugs, that reminds me of the late Colonel Gaddafi, remember? He used to say all demonstrators were under drugs and pills and things like that.
Well, in fact, he was the one on the drugs.
Of course. So this is why I was asking if Trump did take any.
Maybe he doesn't have his meds balanced.
I think the interpretation that we're getting here is very important, because it's not obvious necessarily to people outside the United States that these are the dividing lines and these are the dog whistle messages that are coming. Because ultimately, you know, Trump does sound reasonable there, but I don't think we can believe him on anything. Trump will be president. We won't have stop and frisk. I mean, it's not up to the president to decide.
Well, the court
that,
would shut
know.
it down. But
Or
then
the
he
court
would get to
shut it
name the
down.
Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Mark Dean, I can't help asking you, what do Canadians think of this campaign?
But I think, you know, Canadians are, in a sense, like the rest of the world, they look on in horror, quite frankly. Not all Canadians, of course, but, you know, every country has its own problems. But I think having that just step back of not being American and not being in the same sort of mindset, it's easier to see Donald Trump for what he is, quite frankly.
Vivian Walt, next Monday, the first debate between the two candidates. You describe Hillary Clinton as cerebral. How does she counter Donald Trump in a debate?
This is going to be very interesting to see. I mean, Trump has shown himself to be obviously a kind of bullying debater during the primaries. He managed to kind of insult everybody on the stage. He won't get away with that with Clinton, probably. But she will be a lot more prepared, possibly, than the other.
But he's being prepared a good thing against somebody who says a lie every second, or a
well, that's
mistruth.
true. I mean, I think that he will prove to be a very difficult person to debate because it doesn't matter what he says. He doesn't care what he says, and he doesn't care if it's true or not. He doesn't see any margin in it for him to prepare himself on the facts of policy, for example.
The Clinton campaign has been leaking that, she's preparing lines to provoke him, which is an interesting strategy. Will it work? I mean, this guy's been doing reality TV, for decades. So
if you're the debate coach
what you're going to say? He's got little fingers. I mean,
Christopher, if you're the debate coach, what do you tell Hillary Clinton?
I'd tell Hillary, we need a little passion, Hillary. We don't need you to be so cool. You're going to talk about stop and frisk. That'll be an issue in the debate. You're going to talk about stop and frisk. Say what that does to the black community. Say how people feel. Accuse him of pandering to the white community and trying to pretend he's in the middle of the road. Do something that moves people. The problem with Hillary is she couldn't move a flea. She is an absolutely flat speaker, and when she speaks loudly, she sounds like the Howard Dean scream that never ends. She's a terrible candidate, as I think I've said before on this show, and I think she's going to look very bad in the debates. People who have the idea that she can outsmart him by being smart, that's a disaster for her. We were talking earlier. A lot of people who support Trump are tired of the feeling they've had for the last 8 years that the President of the United States was condescending to them. And that is the impression that Obama gave to a lot of people. Hillary is the great condescender, much more even than Obama.
All right, when we come back in The World This Week, we're going to take a look at a politician on this side of the Atlantic who's been accused of taking a page out of Donald Trump's playbook. Stay with us.